Hello, I'm Derek Wheatley and welcome to episode 12 of the Weekly Wheatley podcast. As always, thank you very much for listening and all your support over the last, whatever it is, 2 months, 3 months. Thanks for all your likes and, sharing and all the stuff you do. We're trying to like kind of get some marketing going for the podcast, and we're myself and John obviously have no experience in those kind of things, so we're looking, Googling, doing all the stuff you normally do if you haven't a clue what you're at, and hoping to come up with some ideas to get the podcast out there a bit more and for more people to hear it. I'm trying to work on the Saturday show a bit more as well, the live stuff we've been doing, because it's okay for me giving recommendations, but I don't know, there should be a little bit more content there with regards to what we're doing on the podcast as well. So we're trying to figure some stuff out. I hope you're all doing all right with the lockdown. Look, another week is gone. So we're getting closer. We don't know what's going on, obviously, but hopefully things are working out. There's been some good news from the HSE, and hopefully we're flattening the curve, and we'll be over this soon enough without too much more damage. So let's get into it. Jer asked me last week about my favourite English language directors and then foreign directors. I gave you my English language last week, so I'm going to go for the foreign language this week. I've embraced the 2 notebooks, folks, because I can't. One notebook is just for the notes, the scrawls, basically, the research, and then the other is for the broken down kind of bullet points, but I need both, so I'm going to be swapping between. Let's hope my reading skills are better this week, because I have actually got quite a few notes here, and I'm a sucker for correct pronunciation of things. So last week I was pretty shocking, but it was a bit of fun, so what harm. Listen, we'll get into it. So I've done, like I did last week, this week I've done 4 foreign language directors, and I've given some films that you should watch by them. My first one is my favourite director of all time, actually. He's a Japanese director called Akira Kurosawa. He's done so many films, over 50 films. I have not seen them all. Some of them are hard to get. In Ireland, even online, they're quite hard to get some of his early ones. So I'm gonna talk a bit about him. So he's hugely influential on foreign films and English films directors. His films opened the Western market to the Japanese film industry, which is obviously huge because the Japanese film industry is amazing. Great directors, great writers. They've done so many stuff, different genres. Even if you look at the horror genre that they do now, is pretty amazing, pretty intense stuff. He's done like from crime to samurai to dramas to war epics. He was a master of action sequences. If you've done, like, he would match anything, and it's so much better than CGI can do, because if you look at the scene towards the end, the big battle scene from, whether it's from Seven Samurai, the attack on the village, or if you look at the scenes from Ran, his 1985 film, they are just incredible. And it's all, obviously no CGI, it's all practical stuff. He was one of the greatest at that, and I don't think he gets appreciated enough for those kind of scenes, actually. So he can do those great battle scenes, and then he can do like stillness and softness when required as well, which is the delicate touch some directors do not have. For all the Star Wars fans out there, I'm not a fan of Star Wars, as everybody knows. I've watched them, but they don't do much for me. He invented Star Wars, lads. You can look into it. If you read up about where George Lucas got the idea for the whole of Star Wars, there's a film called The Hidden Fortress by Akira Kurosawa. That is where he got Star Wars from. So he invented Star Wars, okay? There's no argument to that. So yeah, he was like an artist before he was a director. So what he did actually in 1990, he was quite elderly at this point, and the studios weren't giving him a huge amount of money for his ideas. So there's a film he did called Dreams, about dreams he had over a number of years, like consistently. So he started to, when he tried to work out the production design, he realized that he would have to do some like homemade stuff. So he got his workers, his people, to paint the backdrops, and it looks so good, to see it, because you don't see it anymore like that. So he had this artistic eye that, maybe a lot of people within the film industry, directors who have more of an eye for film rather than art as such. He had both, which makes his films even better. So his 5 films that I would recommend, I mean, these 5, 2 of these are in my top 10. So you have Rashomon, you have Ikuru, which is in my top 10. You have Seven Samurai, which was actually the inspiration for the Magnificent Seven. You have Throne of Blood, which is in my top 10 also, and it's his adaptation of Macbeth. And then you have Ran, which I mentioned already, which is his adaptation of King Lear. So he did a bit of Shakespeare too. So that's Akira Kurosawa, amazing director. Next up we have Claire Denis. She's French. She has a huge interest in colonial and post-colonial West Africa, which is very interesting because people say about can somebody talk about things they haven't experienced? Like, can a white person write a novel about a black person's struggles? And there was actually a big case of it there in the last few weeks. I can't remember the name of the novel, but it was really slammed, the novel was, because they suggested that the author hadn't done this thing. Hadn't experienced those things that she was talking about. I can't remember the name of the novel now, but I haven't read it now. But it was a big seller, and it did take a hit from it. I think it was one of Oprah's book club recommendations as well, which obviously sells big time because of those recommendations. So Claire Denis has a huge interest in that. She kind of wears the heart of French cinema on her sleeve at times, and she's one of the huge examples of how, if Claire Denis was a man and making the film she's making, would she be greater appreciated? And I think the obvious answer is for sure she would. So she's battling against that as well, like sexism within the industry, which hasn't left and probably will never leave, unfortunately. Like I mentioned about Sidney Lumet in the last episode, she collaborates with the people around her for the good of the film. So it's not all about her as the director. It's certainly a joint effort with the people she works with, and like she brings back the same people when she can, and that's obviously is very fluid in the films that she makes. As well as, she works with the same actors too. Obviously, she refuses to hold auditions, which is always a sign of a director who has complete faith in her judgment on meeting someone, and not her judgment on meeting someone and then maybe putting them through the test, the actual the screen test, and then maybe not. If someone's having a bad day, or if someone's just not in it at that moment, she's not going to just refuse them on those grounds. She allows herself to meet the person and kind of go from there, which is, I suppose, not a lot of directors would do that. So she has to be. There's a word there that I've scrawled, but she is like a rebel within the film industry, and because of being a woman, obviously she needs to be, and it's refreshing that she can make the film she makes. I'm going to fire out 5 films here. She's not done a huge amount of films, but I would Beau Travail, which is a film, I've probably butchered that name, but I'm pretty sure I got it right. That's some false confidence right there. But Beau Travail is considered one of the top 100 films of all time. You should check that out. 35 Shots of Rum, White Material, Bastards, and High Life. High Life is her most recent. It's a very strange film, but it's good. It's a sci-fi one. Robert Pattinson is in space with Julia Binoche, and it's weird, but it's good. It's entertaining. My third director is Andrei Tarkovsky. He's Russian. He's one of those directors. He only did 7 films in his lifetime, but they're so influential. For the people who came after him, a massive influence on people who came after him. He explored spirituality and metaphysical themes in his films. It's slow, like it. He is the king of slow pace, long takes. And if you're not into those films, you'd probably struggle. But if you're one of those people who like slow cinema and meditative cinema, you will get a lot out of it. And I actually would recommend the films to Josh, because he is a big fan of philosophy, and these are heavily philosophical films. And I think he'd take a lot from them. Actually, Josh would. He's obsessed with Japanese films and the directors. And about how to create images in a way that they are. This is actually a quote. He was obsessed with Japanese films and the directors about to create images in such a way that they mean nothing beyond themselves, which is a little philosophical in itself, and it's very hard to explain that if you haven't seen the stuff he makes. And it's a kind of contradictory in the way that they are much more than themselves, his films. He is one of those, like, when you consider someone who's done 7 films and to be as greatly admired, appreciated and respected as he is, it's quite a feat. I had to name 5 of his films. He's only done 7. I left out, what would I leave out? The Sacrifice and Nostalgia. So I put in Ivan's Childhood, Andrei Rublev, Solaris, Mirror, and Stalker. They're all such different experiences. Have some patience when you're watching them, but they are incredible visual treats. And obviously the last one had to be Ingmar Bergman, another auteur who wrote most of his work. A very deep thinker. He worked with a lot of the same actors. He had a partnership with his cinematographer Sven Nykvist, who he allowed himself to concentrate on the dialogue while Nykvist looked for the location. So he completely trusted in his cinematographer. And a cinematographer, if anybody doesn't know, is one of the most important people in a film, especially if you want those visuals. If the visuals are one of the most important things in your work, then you need a talented cinematographer like Nykvist, and he shot some amazing stuff. So his films are very beautiful, Bergman's. His lighting is as important as to what is being said most of the time. If you watch a lot of his early stuff, where it's more on location, maybe shot a lot of it indoors, it's incredible what he does with natural lighting. Again, like Tarkovsky, I should say, deeply philosophical about life, love, sorrow, a lot of religion, and death is a huge thing that hangs over his work, which hangs over life in general. So he goes with all those things, and he really shows them in the kind of harsh light. He would later let go of the tight rein on the dialogue, and he trusted in his actors a bit more to improvise. Then the people he worked with, Max von Sydow, I'm drawing a blank here on their name. That's terrible. Anyway, he worked with a lot of the same actors, who were kind of, they had something very unique in their faces. Now, if you watch, like I say, if you watch his films like Persona and things like that, there's something so unique in the people he chose to. Bibi Anderson, that's one of the actresses he worked with. I couldn't think of her first name, but just and Liv Ullmann. Liv Ullmann is an amazing actress, one of the greats. Something very interesting in their faces and what he does with them and how he lights them. The 5 films are The Seventh Seal, Wild Strawberries, The Magician, Persona, and Scenes from a Marriage. Again, I could have picked 10 other films, so it was a really hard choice with Bergman. Hope that gives you some food for thought, that you can kind of get stuck in there and enjoy some of those films. Thank you very much for the question again. Right, what I'm going to talk about, the main part of the episode, is going to be about mental health in fame and celebrities, and how we see them and how they were seen at the time. I chose 4 pretty separate people, so it'll be interesting to just see the differences in how over the years mental health has been viewed. The first person I'm going to talk about is Frances Farmer. She was an actress in she was from Seattle, Washington. She went from theatre to film, and signed a contract with Paramount on her 22nd birthday in 1935. So that gives you a little bit of the timeline. She was kind of B movies as a supporting actress. Supporting actresses as important as the leads, but never back in the day seen as such. They would never steal a film, I should say. So she got her first big role, her first lead role, alongside Bing Crosby in the musical western Rhythm on the Range. It's the only Frances Farmer film that I've seen. They're very hard to get, but obviously with Bing Crosby in the lead alongside Farmer, it's easy enough to get online. So she was happy with the lack of opportunity she was given, and she returned to the theatre, where she kind of excelled a bit more, and she was more interested in that side of things anyway. Her battle with alcohol and depression caused her to drop out of the Hemingway stage adaptation she was working on. Now, this occurred around the same time as the first time she was stopped by the police. She was driving erratically in LA. Police pulled her over, said that she was drinking. She cursed the police out of it. She was brought into the drunk tank for the night, let out and given a fine. And shortly after that, she was involved in a brawl in a bar, and she ran out of the bar with no top on, so going to running naked down the street, again arrested. After a return to Hollywood and a couple of supporting roles again, her reportedly erratic behaviour began to surface. On her first trip to court, after one of her many arrests, she claimed that police had violated her civil rights. She demanded an attorney and threw an inkwell at a judge, resulting in her being restrained by bailiffs. While being escorted from the court, Farmer lashed out, knocking down 2 policemen, I should say. When she was being carried away, she shouted, "Have you ever had a broken heart?" Which is a pretty powerful line, actually. Obviously, there's no explanation as what she meant, but maybe she just meant in general, in the sense of her depression. So she avoided jail, but was transferred to the psychiatric ward of the Los Angeles General Hospital. She was diagnosed with manic depressive psychosis, which was probably the forerunner of a definite dementia praecox. Now, I've pronounced that wrong for sure, but that basically was a term that was eventually replaced with schizophrenia. So days later, she was transferred to a minimum security psychiatric institute in San Fernando Valley. Farmer was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. She was administered insulin shock therapy. Now, insulin shock therapy is brutal by the sounds of it, where patients were repeatedly injected with large doses of insulin in order to produce daily comas over a number of weeks. It has been suggested that it was literally a way to control the patients. It was easier seen at the time as easier to just put them in a coma than have to look after them and see what they would do naturally around the ward or around the room or wherever they were placed. Her family have claimed that they did not give consent for the treatment, even though the consent was required. Farmer alleged she was given the treatment for 90 consecutive days. It was one of those treatments that was only supposed to run for a couple of weeks. She claims 90 days. After 9 months in the facility, she left one afternoon and walked 20 miles to her half-sister's house. Here we go. Here comes the writing problem. The pair called their mother to complain about the insulin treatment. A lengthy battle began for her mother to take formal guardianship of her daughter from the state of California. Although several psychiatrists stated that she needed more treatment, her mother won. Farmer moved in with her mother. Sorry, my laptop is just... I hope it's not gone, is it? No, we're okay. I thought the episode was gone. Sorry, although several psychiatrists stated that she needed more treatment, her mother won. Farmer moved in with her mother, but they fought bitterly. After one violent attack on her mother, she was committed to Western State Hospital in Washington State. She received shots, hydrotherapy baths, and electric shock treatment, and this is in quotation marks, in order to relax the tensions and keep us quiet, which it did. 3 months later, she was pronounced completely cured and was released. Shortly after, she was arrested for vagrancy. She moved to her aunt's ranch in Nevada, but ran away on a couple of occasions. Her mother then filed for a sanity hearing, where it was ruled that she be recommitted to the Western State Hospital for 5 years. After her full discharge, she got a job sorting laundry in a hotel. She also worked as a bookkeeper and a secretary. A boyfriend started to suggest, I think I have a problem with S's, to suggest a comeback. She would appear in her last film, The Party Crasher, in 1958. I remember reading, actually, I couldn't really find it in my research, but I remember reading that some director said about that film that he always liked Farmer as an actress because there was a light in her eyes, but when he enlisted her or employed her in the film, he said the light had completely gone out of her eyes. She went back to stage work and was also given the chance to have her own TV show, Frances Farmer Presents, which would run for 4 years. She would be arrested for drunk driving again during the rehearsals for her return to stage of the play The Visit. After her TV, film, stage work finished, she would paint and write poetry. She got sober, became a Roman Catholic, and considered writing an autobiography. She started the book, which would remain unfinished until her friend Jean Ratcliffe compiled and released it posthumously. The book is called Will There Be a Morning? Farmer was diagnosed with esophageal cancer in the spring of 1970. She died in August of that year. Okay, so now what I'm going to read out is the lyrics for Frances Farmer Will Have Her Revenge on Seattle by the band Nirvana from their In Utero album. Okay, so this was the first time I came upon Frances Farmer. So the lyrics say, "It's so relieving to know that you're leaving as soon as you get paid. It's so relaxing to hear that you're asking whenever you get your way. It's so soothing to know that you'll sue me, starting to sound the same." And in the chorus he repeats 3 times, "I miss the comfort in being sad." The second verse is kind of more, I think, is clearly about Farmer. "In her false witness, hope you're still with us to see if they float or drown. Our favourite patient, display of patience, disease-covered Puget Sound." Puget Sound is a body of water where Seattle, Washington, where Farmer was from, and obviously the band Nirvana were from Washington State too. "She'll come back as fire to burn all the liars, leave a blanket of ash on the ground." And again he repeats, "I miss the comfort in being sad," which I'll come back to that lyric because it's quite important. It's a great lyric actually in the when you hear the controversy part. So the controversy which goes along with Farmer and kind of the urban legends that go along with her. In 1978, film critic William Arnold published Shadowland, which for the first time alleged that Farmer was the subject of a transorbital lobotomy. Now, if you don't know what that is, that's essentially they used an ice pick-like instrument up through the nose, into the skull, into the frontal lobe, and basically scrambled it because that was the place where they reckoned that the depression would take hold. It's barbaric. I read a book about the guy, it's called The Lobotomist, about the guy who created and the lobotomy, and then about the history of the lobotomy, and it's wow. But it was particularly gruesome back then. Obviously it's been outlawed now, but so the scenes of this lobotomy were shown in the film Frances from 1982, which stars Jessica Lange. It's the shocking film. It's a really good film. Jessica Lange was actually nominated for an Oscar for it. So during a court case against the film's producers, Arnold revealed that the lobotomy episode was fictionalized. Years later, on the DVD commentary of Frances, the director Graham Clifford stated, "We didn't want to nickel and dime people to death with facts," which is quite a blasé statement really to make. Farmer's family, friends and 3 ex-husbands all denied or did not confirm that the procedure was completed. Her sister claimed the hospital asked for permission to perform the lobotomy, but her father was horrified by the notion and threatened to sue. All lobotomies were recorded at the time, and although 300 patients received one, there is no record of Frances having been through one. I miss the comfort in being sad, which is Kurt Cobain's kind of nod to the fact that she was given a lobotomy. It's very much he idolized Frances Farmer, and he believed the story that she was lobotomized. The idea that the sadness of somebody could be taken away from them because of something as kind of horrific as a lobotomy sits kind of in line with Cobain, a lot of Cobain's lyrics and a lot of Cobain's ideas that sadness was a part of existence as it is, but very much a part of his existence. And he would, if it was taken away from him, he'd miss the comfort of it, which is, you know, it's actually a great line when it's lined up with something like this. So I what I get from, you know, she also mentioned that people had lined up, orderlies in the hospital had lined up to rape her every day. And again, that was refuted by the hospital and by Frances Farmer's family. It's kind of a murky kind of story, because you're hoping that she was not harshly treated, but then you hear about the insulin shock therapy, and you know, you're hoping that maybe the hell that she went through with 5 years in there wasn't as bad as she said it was, in the sense that she wasn't raped and that there was no lobotomy taken. So I've got some questions about this, and I'd love to hear your answers about it, because I talked about this on Saturday, and after I talk about each person here, I'd love to hear what you have to say about it, because I want it to be a bit more interactive, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. So the questions I had after this, like, for me as a Nirvana fan, am I more convinced of the lobotomy? I'm probably not. I think, you know, the idea that urban legends spread quite quickly, and it's particularly in the home state, where she would be one of the more famous people from there. The idea that she had a lobotomy, she went through hell and stuff, is a better story maybe than the one that actually happened, you know. So I'm not as convinced about the lobotomy. Is it all urban legend with the flames being fanned in popular culture? I say this because there's films about her. There's 2 films about her. There's 2 Nirvana songs about her, one unreleased and one is Frances Farmer Will Have Her Revenge in Seattle. And there's also a stage play about her life called St. Francis of Hollywood. There's definitely a romanticism that comes with everybody of fame, and whose life weren't quite what we'd expect them to be in those positions. You know, we think it's all glitz and glamour, and obviously for Frances Farmer, it was pretty much hell, and she had to go through it, and you know, that's kind of brutal in itself. And to romanticize it is maybe a way of us looking past the kind of, maybe not so much the boring aspects of our life, because it was anything but boring, but that idea of, like, you know, somebody had to go through a lot more torture than they did. And the idea that we romanticize a lot of things, you know, even Kurt Cobain's death is romanticized by certain people, and a lot of copycats and stuff. So we do always look for those kind of things. It's sad, but let me know what you think of the Frances Farmer case, and those questions. Get back to me on it. Thanks. Fusion Training Centre, Monksland Athlone. A place to train in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, kickboxing, martial arts and CrossFit. A great atmosphere with experienced coaches and a real sense of community. If you want to join the team, find us on Facebook at Fusion Training Centre, or drop in for a chat. Fusion Training Centre. Train like a warrior. Little bit of a mistake at the start of that, but that's okay. So let's talk about a man called Thomas Eagleton. He was born in 1929. Served in the Navy for 2 years and later became a lawyer. In 1956, he was elected circuit attorney of the city of St. Louis. And at 31, he became the youngest in state history to become the Missouri State General. In 1968, he became a U.S. Senator. Eagle suffered from depression and checked himself into hospital 3 times between 1960 and 1966 for physical and nervous exhaustion, receiving electroconvulsive therapy twice. He later received the diagnosis of bipolar II. The hospitalizations were not publicized and had little effect on his political ambitions. In 1972, after George McGovern won the Democratic nomination to run for the presidency, he asked a number of the big players like Ted Kennedy, Walter Mondale, Hubert Humphrey, I always have a problem with his name, and Ed Muskie to be his running mate, but they turned him down, as Nixon appeared unbeatable and McGovern was seen as far too liberal for the Catholic Middle America. After Senator Gaylord Nelson also declined, he suggested Thomas Eagleton. McGovern chose Eagleton after a minimal background check, which was pretty standard at the time. Obviously, different now. Eagleton made no mention of his hospitalizations to McGovern. Just over 2 weeks after Eagleton was named as McGovern's pick, Eagleton admitted the truth of news reports that he had received electroshock therapy for clinical depression during the 60s. Initially, McGovern said he would back Eagleton 1,000%. He then consulted privately with preeminent psychiatrists, including Eagleton's own doctor, which I find quite strange because I thought there was a Hippocratic oath, but maybe it doesn't count when presidents are asking, presidential candidates are asking. So Eagleton's doctor advised him that a recurrence of Eagleton's depression was possible and could endanger the country should McGovern become president. That's quite hyperbolic to say it could endanger the country. So then, 19 days after the nomination, Eagleton withdrew at McGovern's request and was replaced by Sergeant Shriver. A Time magazine poll at the time found that 77% said that Eagleton's medical record would not affect the vote, which is great, amazing at the time to think that number, 77% it wouldn't affect, but it didn't really matter about the public, I suppose. McGovern later stated that the frequent references to Eagleton's shock therapy would detract from his campaign platform. The Republicans could go on to use the fact that McGovern's failure to vet Eagleton thoroughly was a sign that he had poor judgment himself. McGovern would only go on to win the state of Massachusetts and the District of Columbia. He was hammered by Nixon, basically. Eagleton would go on to have a successful political career, being re-elected to the Senate in 74 and 80. Eagleton did not seek a fourth term in 86. In 87, he returned to Missouri as an attorney, political commentator, and professor at Washington University in St. Louis. He remained an activist and a thorn in Republican side right up to his death in 2007 from heart and respiratory problems. So my question, I find it fascinating that a man would go to that level of in politics to be elected as a candidate for vice presidency of America, and then to be all falling apart after 3 weeks because of his mental health. And that was, 1972. I know we all say different times, but my questions to you, did his treatment set mental health back in the US in any way? I would say yes. I would say the 77% who said it wouldn't affect their vote is refreshing. But I do think at the same time that the way the Republicans switched it around, and I'm not saying it's just Republicans, it could have been Democrats if it was vice versa. The way they turned it around against that, and even the way psychiatrists said it could damage the country, which to suggest that mental health was so horrible within one person that it could affect however many millions there were in America at the time. Didn't his political track record show competency? I would say it did, and for someone so young at the time, at 31, who had already had some mental health difficulties to get to the place where he was, I would for sure think he was competent enough to do the job that is being asked of him. Would someone who was diagnosed as bipolar affect you from voting for them? Obviously, it wouldn't affect me because I am, but would it affect you? Could you, if you want to answer those questions, it'd be great to hear them back, and I'll read them out next week. And listen, if nobody answers any of these questions, it's fine. I've got other stuff to talk about. We're all good. We have loads of stuff. So if you want to have a chat about it, it'd be great. The next person I'm going to talk about, big hero of mine, literary hero, David Foster Wallace. So Wallace never wrote a word about his own mental illness. But to understand the pain he was in, you would have to read his short story, The Depressed Person, about a woman with major clinical depression who attempts to dissect her pain by going to a therapist to discuss her childhood trauma. After the therapist suddenly dies, the depressed person is sent into a tailspin, reaching out to her support network in late-night phone calls, all the while knowing that no one will truly understand, which is You know, a lot of people who have suffered with mental health and depression will know how that feels. If you want to read that story, it's actually free at the moment on harpers.org. The name of the story, again, is The Depressed Person. It's an incredible piece of writing. So he was born to successful parents. As a teen, he was a tennis player. Wallace was not diagnosed with mental health problems until college, where he was also drinking too much. In '89, he spent 4 weeks at McLean Hospital, a psychiatric institute where he successfully completed a drug and alcohol detox. Wallace's first 4 published works were his novel The Broom of the System, which he followed up with A Girl with Curious Hair, which is a collection of short stories, an amazing collection of short stories. While Wallace taught literature as an adjunct professor at Emerson College, Boston, he began work on what would be considered by many as his masterpiece, Infinite Jest, a novel that literally gave me a repetitive strain injury in my thumb because it's huge. The novel was finally published to critical acclaim in 1996, but it didn't come without its problems. Wallace would now have to face book tours. He had self-doubt and paralyzing self-awareness all his life, and without the backup of alcohol that he may have had when he was younger to curb his anxieties, Wallace was left standing at a podium in front of an expectant crowd, a bandana wrapped around his head to stop the sweat from running into his eyes. And it was not a fashion statement. And a lot of people will know Foster Wallace, pictures of Foster Wallace. He wears bandanas, and it was never for a fashion. He was on antidepressants for most of his adult life. Even he had to change them on a couple of occasions. He was close to suicide a couple of times through the years, prone to fits of rage and reclusive behaviour. He found solace and companionship with his fellow AA members, students, and literary colleagues. Wallace was exceptionally bright. If you want to see how clever actually he was, if you watch the conversation he had with Charlie Rose, if you watch it on Charlie Rose is a difficult character these days, but if you watch it on YouTube, he's so good to listen to. I love listening to really intelligent people, even if I don't know what they're talking about. I love it. Or if you want to read some of his non-fiction work again in his books, Consider the Lobster or A Supposedly Fun Thing I'll Never Do Again, to see his intellect. Oh, I love it. I love it, you know. But Wallace seemed burdened with the idea that his parents weren't proud of him, or they didn't see him as intelligent enough. He could seem preoccupied in his non-fiction work with the idea that he wasn't smart. He was just really good at pretending to be smart. He called it, in his short story Good Old Neon, the fraudulence paradox. A notion of grandiosity stuck in his head and made him feel bad for his failings and threatened his credibility. Any number of things threatened his sense of credibility, really. Critical praise, academic success, romantic attention, people laughing at his jokes or not. These were all landmines, and he felt a split between how he was perceived and who he really was. In such moments, his life became a lonely performance. With each experience, the feelings gained traction in his mind. Sorry, I read that wrong, but you know what I mean. Wallace continued to write short story collections and non-fiction essays for various publications, but he would remain under pressure until he delivered that follow-up novel to Infinite Jest, which he was struggling to finish, what with deadlines and bouts of crippling depression. In 2009, Wallace experienced severe side effects from his primary antidepressant, and on his doctor's advice stopped taking it. His depression returned, so he tried electroconvulsive therapy. He went back on the antidepressants, but found them ineffective. In his final days, he would lay his head on his wife's or his mother's lap and cry. One day, his wife went to get some shopping. Wallace shone a number of flashlights, or sorry, not flashlights, what are they called? Bedside lamps. A number of lamps on his unfinished manuscript, wrote a suicide note, and hanged himself from a rafter in his house. Now, my questions on Foster Wallace, if you don't know him. Was it always destined that Foster Wallace would end his life this way, after all the pain? And I don't think it was destiny as such, but I certainly think that that's part of it, where you think that someone was so down, so low, so like hurting so much inside, and a man that seemingly couldn't live up to the high expectations he set himself, that it was always going to go that way for him, and that's so sad to think. In other words, do artists' legacies increase from death by suicide? I think it's no doubt that there's a certain amount. Romanticism isn't the correct word, but I suppose you know where I'm going with it. That when we see someone who's been through such pain, and they end their own lives, there's for some reason in our minds there's a leverage to the work then, and that the work becomes, we read into it so much more. you know? Like, we mightn't see a person as particularly depressed because of glamorous lifestyles of rock stars, or whoever we're talking about, film stars, even writers at the time. You you build up this idea or this picture of this romantic life that just isn't there. And I do think that their legacies increase, and not just monetary wise, I mean in general. And then I suppose my experience with Foster Wallace, I didn't kind of come across Foster Wallace till I was in my, maybe, I suppose, mid-20s. I think the first thing I read by him was Infinite Jest, because it was one of those books that people were talking about as, the Ulysses of its time. And I remember reading it, and some of it going in, some of it not going in, but I admire the fact that it's like one page would be a sentence. I was like, where's the full stops? And he just kept putting commas. And like the end notes at the end of Infinite Jest are about 300 pages long, and they're tiny, tiny writing. It's a daunting thing to take on, but I read it. Then I read the short stories, which are unbelievable, and his non-fiction is probably his best stuff. His writing, his essay about Roger Federer alone is just ridiculous, because he's such a tennis fan. As I said, he was a good tennis player when he was younger. I'm very attached to his work. I think he's one of the greats. It's a shame he never saw himself as that. He's shame that he was just, the idea that he thought he was only good at playing smart is really actually quite sad, when he was as smart as pretty much, anybody really. Proper intellect, So my last person to talk about, probably the most divisive, is the wonderful Kanye West. At the start of not at the start of the song, but during his song Yikes on his album Yay, I should say, sorry. He says, "See, that's my third person. That's my bipolar shit. That's my superpower. Ain't no disability. I'm a superhero." It is, I can only imagine actually to younger people how empowering that is, that if younger people have been diagnosed with bipolar and they love Kanye West and they hear that kind of stuff, it's usually empowering, and we'll get to what happens later on. But I remember hearing it, and I was thought, yes, Kanye, for those who don't know, he was born and raised in a middle-class house in Chicago. He got into music when he was quite young, and through hard work and proper talent, ended up creating beats and producing for a young Jay-Z. Kanye tried to present his own songs and raps to Jay-Z and others, but it has been said now, because Jay wanted to keep him on as his beats man and producer, he wasn't taken seriously. And also he wasn't taken seriously because of his middle class background, because they, what Jay-Z had been through, grown up a hard life, selling drugs, things like that. Kanye was seen as kind of a middle class dude who was just a producer. So Kanye had to wait and work very hard for his opportunities. When he did eventually drop his debut album, College Dropout, it received critical acclaim. Kanye has now released some of the best albums of the last 20 years. That's not me, that's my opinion, and I stick to it, because some of his albums are incredible. So his talent has never really been in question. Other things have been. So outside of his music, the first moment I remember seeing him, seeing kind of Kanye, I suppose I had heard of him and I heard his music, but I hadn't seen him, was when he did the little piece on the Hurricane Katrina victims, the appeal that they had on TV, and he was standing there with Mike Myers, and he just came out with, completely off the cuff, George Bush doesn't care about black people. And the thing that you take away most from that, obviously the statement is incredible for someone to say about a president in the middle of something that's being watched by millions and millions of people. The thing that I take away is Mike Myers' face. If you watch that clip again, just look at Mike Myers' face when somebody goes off script and says that. He's just stunned disbelief. He then interrupted a Taylor Swift speech, we all know this part, at an awards show to tell everybody that it should have been, in fact, Beyonce who won the award. That famous line, "I'm gonna let you finish," and then he turns, one of the greatest films one of the great videos of all time about Beyonce, and Beyonce looks mortified. He posted tweets in 2016 seemingly asserting that Bill Cosby is innocent of all sexual allegations against him, which is wow. A wow moment. In 2018, West stated on an appearance on TMZ, when you hear about slavery for 400 years, that sounds like a choice to me. You were there for 400 years, and it's all of y'all. It's like we are mentally imprisoned, which is mentally imprisoned is such a powerful statement, right? He will later go on to defend the comment by saying that he knew that slavery was not a choice. He knew that people were shackled and forced onto the ships, but the fact that black people had the numbers and stayed enslaved meant that black people were mentally enslaved. I don't know, actually, I'm going to zip forward to my questions here about Kanye. I don't know if I say it. I think I probably do. But the mentally enslaved thing, like what he's trying to say, obviously, is that, with people who are, we won't just say black people, but people who are imprisoned and who have the mentality of people who are imprisoned, it's a long road to recover. And black people in America have had such ill treatment for so many, many years that some of them will still feel that mental enslavement. The difference, or the problem with Kanye's statement is he forgetting the people, the civil rights movement, and the people like Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King and Malcolm X, even the people who are still working, in the governments today, who worked right through the 60s, 70s, 80s. Very dismissive statement by him to suggest that black people were still mentally enslaved, when so many people have fought for him and for all others, and to suggest that these people back in, we'll say, 20s, 30s, who were on farms picking cotton and doing all those hideous jobs and being treated like cattle or something, for him to suggest that they had made the choice to do that because they were pretty much weak, is what he was saying, is a shocking statement. And that kind of apology he gave is lame. The mental enslavement thing, I can understand what he's trying to say, but Jesus Christ, you got to have more. There's got to be more intelligence and more research behind your statement before you make those kind of, before you say those kind of things. So that pissed me off about Kanye West, I'll be honest. And I love the guy's music, but that really got my goat up. So in 2016 on the song, what's that say? He rapped about the fact that he was on antidepressant, Lexapro. So that was back in 2016. So before abruptly ending a concert in 2016, he asked Jay-Z to call him and suggest that Jay-Z may send killers around to get him. Now, that Kanye was on stage when he was saying this. So, unfortunately for West, he's in the world of smartphones, so all of this was captured by a lot of people. People saw it. So the following day, he was committed to the UCLA Medical Center with paranoia and hallucinations. It was said to the media that he was suffering from dehydration and sleep deprivation, but the cancellations of 21 concerts suggested something more. In an interview with David Letterman in 2019, West said he often has suicidal ideation and that he is bipolar. It was the first time he actually came out and stated that he was bipolar rather than through song or whatever. So with the world looking on, West met Trump in 2019 in the White House. You cannot nor should you diagnose someone from a distance, okay? It's because it's kind of maddening when you hear actual psychiatrists do that on TV about people like Trump, actually, because people at the start of Trump's presidency were saying all sorts, he was this, he was that. All these mental health diagnoses they were given, and these are proper, like, esteemed psychiatrists saying this stuff. That's goes against, and I saw a lot of people psychiatrists push back, saying you should never do that, from afar diagnose anyone, especially the fact that if you're calling Trump something and then someone sitting home what actually got that illness, and then they say, oh, I'm like Trump, and then it's just one of those horrible things to do. You shouldn't do it, no matter how you dislike the guy. I call him a dick, but that's a different thing. But we know Kanye has been diagnosed as bipolar because he told us. So he's stated that he's bipolar. What can be said about his behavior during that meeting is that he was on a serious high during the meeting in the White House. If you watch it, he told the TV reporters to delay the broadcast so they can bleep out his cursing. This all stuff was going live, he was talking about wearing Trump's MAGA hat and how it made him feel like a Superman, a superhero. The Trump created bombastic language. That's a big thing with it. Also, he said he was a superhero because of bipolar, and now he's a superhero because of a MAGA hat. He said he actually wasn't bipolar, just sleep deprived. So he took away that. He was clearly diagnosed bipolar, but he just took it away because maybe in his high he thought, well, I'm not. And that's very, it's especially in highs, it's very easy for you to say that the doctors are wrong. I'm grand. You don't say that in your lows. You definitely say it in your highs. He couldn't sit still. He was budging. He was standing up. He was getting his phone out. He took his phone out to show Trump the iPlane 1, a hydrogen-powered aeroplane. He begins saying that Apple will work on it before completely changing the subject mid-sentence to SNL. He was all over the place. He couldn't hold down his concentration and stuff like that. I just want to state that this isn't diagnosing from a distance like I just gave out about. He is bipolar. It's saying that he was on a high during that meeting, and he clearly was. It's not like, that's not diagnosing someone. He's bipolar, end of story. Lots of his answers start well before he trails off and he switches subjects midstream or he rambles, and you can see it a lot. He does it so much. Again, I'm not criticizing Kanye for his political beliefs, for wearing that hat or putting Trump on the back. Patting Trump on the back. Putting Trump on the back didn't work. I had to go back to that word. These are just observations that I made, being someone who knows what a high feels like. So, if from my experience that who's texting me at this hour? If from my experience that I know what a high feels like, I can see it in someone else, I think, and I can definitely see it in Kanye West during that live segment. So my questions on Kanye West, if you'd like to answer them, is it easier to criticize Kanye's actions because of the overexposure? Like, again, when I talked about the other three people who in the show, like, we didn't see tweets, YouTube, Facebook, all those kind of things, Instagram. Kanye is very active on those kind of things. So is it easy to criticize him more because we see more of him? I think it is easier because I do think that he's so famous. He's so in our faces that we see a lot more of him. What does that say? Was his owning of his mental illness empowering to other sufferers? I would say absolutely. But then he took it away again. So I kind of felt sad about that he gave people a glimpse into it, and people kind of said, yes, somebody's out there acknowledging it. And then he took it away again. I find that quite disappointing and sad, but it's his life, So his how disappointing is this flip on bipolar? Like I said, from me as a sufferer, I would say it's very disappointing. But could it, if you don't have it and you're out there and you want to answer that question as someone who's neutral to it, could you get back to me? Just before that'd be great if you answer those questions, by the way. It'd make a great show next week. Just to answer a question my Aunt Mia asked. She asks, sometimes when I know that a person has anxiety or mental health issues, I'm always afraid that I'll say something to upset them, so I have a tendency to avoid them, which I really hate. Is there a way that I can deal with that? So what I'd say to you, Mia, right? People with mental health problems want to feel normal. I say normal in inverted commas because every time normal brings up, someone says, well, what's normal? I get that, right? But they want to feel normal because they will see people without mental health problems as normal. People with mental health problems will feel abnormal, and I know I do at times. So that's the number one thing that you always remember. They want to be treated and seen as normal. So to be spoken to in an unnatural way, or something that we can see through, will make us feel abnormal. And it's very easy to see through something when someone's not being genuine. You won't upset any people if you speak to the person with respect and consider their feelings like anyone else. It's not the front. What shouldn't be front of your mind is when you're talking to someone is this person's has anxiety, this person's depressed. That shouldn't be the front of your mind. The front of your mind is just to speak to them with respect about your day. How are they doing? It doesn't have to be anything to do with mental health. So ignore that when you go into the conversation. And I know that's quite difficult if you know that the person's suffering, but try your very best to make them feel normal. That's the most important part. So if they are upset or physically anxious, like it is very obvious that they are, then give them that platform to share what it is that is on their mind. Be the ear and shoulder that they might need, right? So this is, again, it's really important that if it's a case of knowing for a fact that they're going through something and they're in the middle of an episode, then it's fine to broach the subject, but in a very kind of in a way that's not just straight in the face going, what's wrong, you anxious or whatever. It's just to kind of be that calming presence around them, because you are the calmer presence in the room. Don't see yours and theirs don't see yours and their feelings as two completely separate things. Their feelings are just more heightened in the moment. Again, talk normally to them. Again, it is about that. It's about heightened states of emotions for them, but you're still you, and you're still able to speak calmly and considerately and see them. Again, as I say, I know that you, Mia, don't see them as abnormal, but they see themselves as abnormal. So to be treated as a normal person is what they want. So be calm. Don't go into it about mental health unless they bring it up, but treat them as you would treat anybody else. There's no need for you to be coming into a situation as a little bit anxious yourself because you don't know what to say. Come into it the way you come into a conversation with anybody, and that removes that extra kind of layer of uncomfortableness, and it leads to a kind of a freer conversation, and you won't believe how quickly you'll put someone at ease if you approach it that way. I hope that answers your question, Mia. Thank you very much for asking it, of course. That was a good show, I think. I like talking about people who inspire me and who I know have had mental health issues and have got through them and have just been incredible in their field. I hope you enjoyed it. Like I said, if you want to listen back, or if you've taken notes during it and you have some questions you want to, some of the questions I asked, you want to follow up on them from a mental health point of view, or from someone who doesn't have mental health and just is looking from a different kind of standpoint as I was to those people. I'm sure Kanye will be a big one because he's the biggest of the people I mentioned, especially, obviously today. If anybody, like I said about marketing at the start of the show, me and John are Googling, we're doing our best. If anybody has any good ideas, they'd be appreciated. Throw them out there. We're trying to work on Instagram and Facebook and YouTube and different things like that. I want to shout out to John, actually, again. He's still doing his charity push-ups. We're coming towards the end of April now. I know he's done over 2,000 of the 3,000, which is deadly. I finally wrote down the hospital. It's the Laurel Inn Hospice for Children. So hugely important, obviously, for kids. He's trying to hit 200. I think it's €200. Please go to John Francis, his account, and give him a $5, whatever you have. He's nearly there. He's putting work in, and it's for a good cause. So if you could do that, it'd be great. Shout out to his family and to Megan. Thanks to Jer, my mother, my father, my grandfather. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you can. We're getting some numbers in there, and we're going to maybe get some other stuff apart from just an episode up there a week. We might upload some stuff. I don't know. I have no idea what we're going to do, but we'll do something. Facebook is the Wheatley. Instagram is Wheatley the Weekly, and Twitter is Sweetly_the. We are on Spotify, Apple, Google Podcasts, Breaker, Overcast, Pocket Casts, and Radio Public. Like I said, I enjoyed that episode. Next week we've already got stuff lined up, but like I said, if you want to answer some questions, that'd be deadly. Look, we know the usual suspects who are listening to this. We want to get the listeners up. Please tell your friends. Please share the message. Send out likes and invites on Facebook and stuff. We want to get more ears on this. We want to help some people and maybe get them more attuned to their own mental health and listening to me ramble on about things. I hope if this was your first episode, go back and listen to a few other ones, especially the 4 guests I had on, because they were enjoyable episodes, and we'll get back to them one day, those guests, and we'll be good, So listen, thanks a lot. Appreciate you listening. All the best, and mind yourselves. Bye now.